So kicking off with the build of these devices, this is traditionally what's separated Samsung devices to iPhone devices, but Samsung have finally ditched the full plastic build this time, and we've got a metal frame with Gorilla Glass 4 panels on the front and the back. The iPhone on the other hand has the metal unibody, and in my opinion both look and feel premium. This will come down to your personal preference. Now some of you will say that the S6 looks a lot like the iPhone 6, especially when you look towards the bottom. It does look like Samsung have been inspired by the iPhone 6 design, but this isn't necessarily a bad thing. Now there's also differences in terms of the size of the devices. The iPhone 6 does come smaller overall, 5.3mm in height and 3.5mm in width, although the S6 is 0.1mm thinner. Now this means that the iPhone 6 is a little bit more comfortable to use in one hand, although it does have a smaller screen size. You've got 4.7 inches LED backlit IPS versus 5.1 inches Super AMOLED Quad HD. Now although both screens are really nice and have some great viewing angles and colors, the edge definitely has to go to the S6 here because you've got a huge difference in resolution. You've got 577 ppi versus 326 ppi, and this results in more sharp images and text, especially when you hold the devices up close. Now it might not be significant enough for many people out there, but the advantage has to go to the S6 here. Now looking at the internals, both of these have 64-bit processors, but you have dual core on the iPhone 6 versus octa-core on the S6. Now because of this, on paper the S6 does seem much better and the benchmark scores are also higher, but in terms of day-to-day performance you may not notice a big difference. The iPhone has been well optimized with the operating system and performs really well. Now one area where you may notice the difference is in multitasking, because the S6 has 3GB of DDR4 RAM, whereas the iPhone 6 has 1GB of DDR3 RAM. Now this results in smooth multitasking on the S6, and you've also got features such as multi-window, which allow you to have 2 apps open at the same time. So for instance, you could be watching a video and checking out Twitter at the same time. This functionality is not available on the iPhone 6. Now Samsung have been criticized for speed and lag in the past, and we definitely have huge improvements here. These however do come at an expense of no expandable storage. This is something Samsung users have been used to from before, but this time around you've got 32, 64 and 128 gig storage options. The iPhone 6 has never had expandable storage, and you've got 16, 64 and 128 gig versions. So comparable models here, although the S6 does have a larger base model, this is something I would have liked to have seen from the iPhone. Now let's talk about cameras. This is something that's very important to a lot of people. You've got an 8MP rear facing camera on the iPhone 6, capable of filming 1080p HD, whereas the S6 has a 16MP rear facing camera with optical image stabilization that's capable of filming 4K. Now you can see my full side-by-side camera shootout between these two devices and make your own choice as to which you think is better. However, personally in my opinion, I would say overall the S6 is better because of that high resolution. You do get more detail, and the optical image stabilization definitely helps, especially when it comes to stable video. And let's not forget that the S6 also films at up to 4K, which is much higher than the 1080p on the iPhone. Now where the iPhone 6 does excel is in slow motion. You've got 240 frames a second at 720p. You do have slow motion on the S6, but it's only at 120 frames a second. So for slow motion, I think the iPhone is still king. Now front facing cameras, we all know how important selfies are these days. The S6 has a 5MP front facing camera capable of filming Quad HD resolution, whereas the iPhone 6 has a 1.2MP front facing camera capable of filming just 720p. Now once again, I'll let you decide which you like better, but personally speaking from my experience, I would say that the S6 has the edge. That high resolution produces much sharper images, and having a Quad HD resolution from the front facing camera of the S6 I think is a big advantage. 720p on the iPhone 6 is definitely getting outdated now. Now moving on to the operating systems, you've got iOS 8 on the iPhone 6. On the S6 you've got Android Lollipop, but this does come with Samsung's TouchWiz UI. Now as you know, I don't go into an iOS versus Android debate in these videos, but generally speaking iOS is considered a little bit more simple and straightforward. Android on the other hand offers a lot more customization, and generally you're going to have much more flexibility. Now TouchWiz does give you some nice features. Multi-window was one we mentioned earlier. You've also got customizable quick settings as well as themes. But one advantage that the iPhone 6 has is direct updates from Apple. You're not going to have to wait around With the S6, you are going to have to wait around for Samsung to bring those to you. This can sometimes take months and be very annoying. Now moving on to some of the additional features that both of these devices offer. Firstly, you have a fingerprint scanner on the home button on both devices, and both work just as well as each other. Previously on Samsung devices you had to swipe, but this is no longer the case, and it works very similarly to Touch ID now. Both of these are also going to allow you to make payments. Now it's too early for me to say how well these work because they are still in their early stages and are still being rolled out, but just something to bear in mind for future. The S6 also has some additional hardware features. You've got an IR blaster on the top which allows you to use your S6 as a remote control. You've got a built-in heart rate sensor at the back of the device. Now, I personally didn't find myself using this, but it might be useful to a few people. And there's also an LED notification light at the front. I personally did find this very useful. Now also, just to mention, there is an additional option of the S6 available, which is the S6 Edge. This gives you a unique look and some specialist features which you won't find on other devices. Now both devices have a bottom-facing speaker. I'll let you decide which one you like better.
What's up YouTube, I'm Saf and you're watching Super Saf TV. Here on the channel you'll find news, previews and reviews of the latest tech out there, in particular smartphones and cameras. Not sure which device is faster, which one has the better features, or even which takes the best selfies.
Now finally, looking at the batteries, the iPhone 6 has an 1810 mAh battery, whereas the S6 has a 2550 mAh battery. So you have a larger battery on the S6. Now day-to-day usage will vary from person to person, but in my personal experience I did find that the S6 was slightly better. The S6 also comes with fast charging, so you can charge up the device very quickly. It recharges in roughly about half the time compared to the iPhone 6. This for me personally was a huge plus because I could get a top up very quickly when needed. The S6 also features wireless charging. This is something that's not available on the iPhone 6 out of the box. So there we have it, the S6 versus the iPhone 6. Now essentially, it's not about which one is better, it's about which one is right for you. Thanks for watching. This is Saf on Super Saf TV, and I'll see you next time.